So again, welcome. And with no further ado, I'd like to hand this over to our moderator, Jim Jorgensen.
Great. Thank you, Kirsten. Next slide. So it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our two speakers today, two longtime friends and colleagues. Kristin Fox-Smith is a managing director at Visante, where she is responsible for all things 340B compliance. And Ted Slafsky, who is the publisher and CEO of 340B Report. And Ted is also the founder and principal for Wexford Solutions. So real true 340B experts today. We're really pleased. And I think the information that they're going to provide is extremely timely, given all the things that actually happened even up to yesterday. So they'd like to address some current ESP challenges as well as 340B program opportunities. And then we'd like to spend some time around manufacturer contract pharmacy restriction lawsuits, as well as state and federal legislative updates. And then we'll end with a special opportunity around 340B report. And finally, we'll wrap with questions. So with that, I will turn the program over to Kristin.
Thank you, Jim. And I echo Kirsten's sentiments. The opportunity to present with Ted is a fantastic one. And in addition, when I often get questions about kind of where we're at with 340B and what happened before the chicken versus the egg in terms of a lot of manufacturer issues or legislative issues, my reference is the 340B report. I'm always going back to see what was the last update. I read them as they come out, and then sometimes they all jumble together because I feel like there's so many changes so quickly lately. So making sure that everybody's aware of this one-stop location for access to information that's always timely and always super important to the overall health of the 340B program, I think is really critical. And thank you, Ted, for just continuing to provide that opportunity for covered entities and all stakeholders in the 340B program.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And I usually am on 3 or 4 times a day, so hopefully I'm not being monitored. What are you doing with this information? So as it relates to just current challenges in the 340B space, I mean, we've talked in the past about kind of the ongoing struggles related to manufacturer restrictions and how covered entities can best manage that 340B ESP platform, which is the alternative mechanism to submit data in order to see pricing restored for those manufacturers who have allowed collaboration with ESP. I think the important thing to remember here is it's multi-layered. There isn't just one fix or one approach to be able to gain access to pricing. It's very time consuming, and there's things that have to happen in certain orders in order for you to be successful restoring pricing. But where that works and where we've seen that be successful in regards to focusing on NDCs that you do have pricing access for, kind of restricting or best managing your own in-house retail and specialty pharmacies where possible, a lot of those opportunities still allow savings, much needed savings, to come into our covered entities and health systems and grantees. It's just making sure that you have a process in place to be able to manage all those moving parts and the appropriate FTEs to not take away from the compliance elements, which are equally important in the program. So making sure from a manufacturer perspective, you know what NDCs are restricted and what information is required for each manufacturer with restrictions. You have to work with each wholesaler in terms of accessing that your 340B pricing, which can be difficult given a lot of large systems have multiple wholesalers in order to gain access to all the drugs they need, in addition to obviously relationships for direct dropship items. It's important that the pharmacy designations happen and that those happen really quickly. Otherwise, you're going to have an additional delay in access to pricing. And then ultimately checking all of those things to make sure there's no blocks or no information in the TPA that would allow your TPA vendor to hold back pricing is equally important. And then ultimately, as it relates to reporting requirements, most of the TPAs have built access to information available within their software systems. And there's also reporting information that's available through ESP. So just making sure you leverage those to be able to help understand if there's a problem before you get an inquiry, a formal inquiry from ESP or manufacturers is super important. As it relates to compliance, right? So we've talked about compliance in the past also, and the importance of having dedicated resources for your 340B program. Regardless of the size of your program, and one size definitely doesn't fit all, but there's critical areas that need to be overseen on a day-to-day basis from an operations perspective. And even those areas that covered entities may still be making different decisions about in regards to eligibility or patient definition, any of those areas need to be frequently and closely audited to ensure that you are matching and are in line with your existing written policies and procedures. And audits are still coming from many sources, right? So in addition to having your regular internal audits, if you have contract pharmacy relationships, you're going to want that annual external audit to occur. We are definitely still seeing a large frequency of HRSA audit notifications, both for on-site audits as well as remote audits, and then ultimately manufacturer audits. And we've seen these increase with the collaboration with ESP, and that in order for accumulations to match dispenses, a lot of manufacturers are going the ESP route to formally issue inquiries. And so we're seeing that pick up the number of audits that covered entities need to respond to. And then ultimately the importance of 340B education, right? So training programs in-house are critical, and that training should extend to far beyond pharmacy, given, we've always said 340B is not just a pharmacy program, which is a great thing. The stakeholders that need to also be part of the program are variable. You've got IT, you have legal, nursing, definitely government relations, government affairs, finance, and billing reconciliation staff members are equally critical. And then ultimately being able to develop a report to show what is your, what savings in general, or what services would you say you're able to provide as a result of having access to 340B versus what services may go away if you aren't continuing to be able to see pricing restored or receive price discounts in the 340B space. All those things are equally important. And again, when we say education, making sure that you're having access to information that's timely and accurate is very critical. And that's why as a team, Visante turns to the 340B report knowing that information is accurate and it's always timely. Next slide, Kristin. And then just in regards to program opportunities, like where do we see that for covered entities that have been struggling with the decrease in savings as a result of a lot of restrictions that have occurred and just a lot of the kind of segregation that's gone on in the 340B space? It's important that your TPA, your 340B software systems are configured appropriately. Many larger systems have multiple TPAs, which is necessary in order to work with a large number of contract pharmacies in the contract pharmacy space. Oftentimes you're dealing with external legal counsel, so you may have an external legal counsel group that you need to support and collaborate with as part of your external audits at a covered entity. Apexis is another source for information. And oftentimes both between Apexis Answers or actually speaking to one of the representatives at Apexis, you're able to get information both in regards to their general 340B university, which provides a great source of information for all things 340B and related to all types of 340B programs, and also provide additional opportunities for education and learning through the ACE certificate, which Visante's also had the opportunity to provide educational tools and information to Apexis in the past to use for the ACE modules. And I think that's really important that that information is timely and applicable based on the type of covered entity that you're working with. 340B Health is another source of information, and having access to technical advisors and access to information at 340B Health to keep your program relevant is also really important. 340B report, again, I can't say enough how often our team leverages that information to feel like we're in a good place to provide our covered entities and clients information. And then ultimately hospital associations hopefully have timely information and are great places to provide representation and to start from, working with some advocacy, as Ted will be talking about during his slides, just to make sure that you're well represented as a health system in the area that you're located and that you're well representing your patient population. So areas of growth, those are many, but there's also as much opportunity around savings and as there is growth, making sure that you're appropriately purchasing drug on the appropriate account, in that every instance you're buying drug at the lowest cost that you have access to and that you're compliantly able to is very important. Obviously, drug cost is such a mass percentage of overall spend at health systems and grantees that it's important to try to leverage your cost down from pricing arrangements to the extent possible. Opportunities for growth that many of Visante's other service lines collaborate around are managing home infusion, in-house home infusion, right? So the opportunity to work with health systems and their patient population in regards to infusion referral in the patient's home, specialty pharmacies for all those high-cost specialty drugs that many of the health systems and grantees are providing referrals for, in-house pharmacies, so retail-owned pharmacies that are managed by the covered entity, and then ultimately contract pharmacy expansion. where it makes sense, right? So adding contract pharmacies in which, the majority of NDCs would be restricted or drugs currently not covered doesn't make a lot of sense, but taking the time to do an opportunity analysis to see where are your prescriptions really going, where are your patients going, and how can you best thoughtfully expand your contract pharmacy network is very important. And doing that on a regular basis, at least twice per year, to make sure that you're not left with contract pharmacies that are registered, that aren't receiving activity, that's equally important. And then ultimately, just making sure that as it relates to expansion of care, that your patient population has access to information for your patients and for the public. There's multiple avenues that you can go down to receive access to information that's accurate. And hopefully that ultimately includes partnerships within the community and making sure that from an advocacy perspective, you're able to help patients that want to be part of that message, and that you're also able to deliver the message for hospital associations, for local or state government that want to receive any feedback and want to receive real patient stories about the real impact that you're seeing on the front lines as it relates to 340B. Kirsten, I'll turn it over to Ted.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kristin. Appreciate that update. As Jim mentioned, I was going to begin by giving an update on the various lawsuits that are pending at the federal, in the various federal courts. First of all, I just noticed the dates actually for the oral arguments that occurred in the Eli Lilly and Sanofi cases was actually October 2022. That shows you how long it's been since a decision has been made. We will update the slides before we send them to you, but I apologize for that minor error. But the bottom line is there's only one of three federal appellate court decisions that have actually been finalized, and that was the one in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. As you may all recall, the pharmaceutical industry is suing HHS because HHS wants to require the manufacturers to restore 340B pricing in the contract pharmacy setting. The one court that has made a decision agreed with the manufacturers that they are not required to provide access to unlimited discounts to an unlimited number of contract pharmacies. There are two big cases pending, one in the Seventh Circuit in Chicago and the other one in the Washington, D.C. Court of Appeals. These are the courts right before the U.S. Supreme Court. So these are pretty important decisions. Speaking of decisions made at the Court of Appeals, just yesterday, a court in St. Louis, which covers the area of Arkansas and a number of other states, upheld the legality of Arkansas's first in the nation law that is intended to get the discounts restored for the entities in the state of Arkansas. This was a decision that was a 3-0 decision. So it was fairly, there was unanimity when it came to the decision. And this will be quite powerful in the effort by other states to try to adopt similar laws, because now they have an additional argument to make that those laws are not preempted by federal law. So there is one other state so far that has passed contract pharmacy requirements, and that would be in Louisiana. That law was passed in 2023. Pharma quickly sued the state, and those decisions are pending. I think the fact that the decision came out in favor of the state of Arkansas, both at the federal district level and now at the federal appellate level, will really prompt a number of states to go forward with their efforts to enact their own laws. In fact, if we go to the next slide, I could show you the current status of bills that have been introduced in just this session of the state legislatures. As you can see there, There are many, many bills that have been introduced throughout the country just in the last few months. And in some states, Virginia and West Virginia, they have actually passed it through both chambers and are awaiting the governor's signature. Kentucky and Massachusetts have passed it through one of the two legislative chambers. So there is a lot of progress being made at the state level. The pharmaceutical industry is really stepping up their efforts to try to block the legislation. In fact, there's been a dark money organization, no one knows who is paying for it, that has been placing television ads and getting attention in conservative media outlets, trying to link the 340B program to the immigration crisis. This has been something that is pretty cynical and could or could not be very problematic. It will be it's unclear because the bills were passed by such large margins, both in Virginia and West Virginia, that there would be a veto. But Governor Youngkin in Virginia has actually said that he's having second thoughts about the bill. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in other states. The fact that the bills were literally passed almost unanimously, or in some cases absolutely, with no objections from any lawmaker from either party, does give the chances of its passage. It certainly increases that chance. Next slide. There has also been an effort in many states to enact laws that protect 340B providers from what is perceived as discrimination by PBMs, whether that's underpayments or other contractual terms that are difficult to follow, and ones that are not necessarily the same terms that are applied to other pharmacies that are non-340B. These bills are, have been passed in over 25 states, and I expect there will be more bills passed in this session of the legislature. Next slide. And then there are some more bills popping up related to reporting. And these are reporting requirements for the providers, basically reporting a lot more details on the savings from the 340B program, how they're using the savings, what type of patients being served. I would say the most onerous requirements are in the state of Minnesota. The providers in this are very upset about the amount of information that they have to submit to the state government. There was actually a bill introduced that we reported on yesterday to make it even add even more requirements to the law. The main law is actually based on the American Hospital Association's program stewardship principles. So that was a compromise that the main hospitals were able to work out with the legislature. And there are a couple of bills pending right now, one in Indiana and one in Connecticut. So this is an area of increased attention, and I expect there to be more efforts both at the state and national level to require providers in the program to report more information about how they're benefiting from 340B and how the community and patients are benefiting. Next slide. At the federal level, there is a lot of action going on. First of all, there was a bill that I'll talk about in a few minutes that has passed the House Energy and Commerce Committee that would add a number of new reporting requirements for 340B providers. That was something that was pushed heavily by the drug industry. There's some other bills that have been introduced by pharmaceutical industry friends on Capitol Hill. And then there have been a number of bills that have been introduced that are being championed by folks who are close with the 340B provider community. That includes the 340B Protect Act, which would basically nationalize the laws protecting 340B providers from what are considered to be discriminatory practices by PBMs. That's a bipartisan bill. There's the Sustain 340B Act, which I will talk about a little bit later, but that's a significant bill that was introduced by 6 bipartisan members of the U.S. Senate. And there's the 340B Patients Act, which was just introduced late yesterday by Representative Matsui, a Democrat from California, and that would require drug companies to restore discounts in the contract pharmacy area. There are also a number of new coalitions that have formed over the last year or so. One of them is called ASAP 340B, which is an alliance between pharma and the National Association of Community Health Centers. There's another group which represents other health centers called the Advocates for Community Health. They're proposing a new program called 340BC that would be available for the grantees as well as the small hospitals, the rural hospitals. There's another group called the 340B Working Table, which is an interesting coalition consisting of some large health systems, a lot of them based in South Dakota, along with a few drug companies, including Genentech. They're working closely with that group of 6 U.S. senators to come up with a compromise bill. And then there are other working groups as well. And then, of course, you may recall that Senator Cassidy, he is the ranking Republican on the Help Committee, which has jurisdiction over the 340B program, has launched an investigation into the 340B program. Next slide. Okay. In the House, there are actually 2 bills that have gotten some significant traction. One of them has already passed the House, and that would be related to reporting on the revenue that covered entities were able to make from Medicaid managed care plans. Not every state allows 340B providers to bring in revenue from Medicaid managed care plans, but some states do. That would be, you would be allowed to continue to get access to those discounts, but you'd have to report on how much you're making in what your margins are. And you'd have to be able to share this information with the government, which would be posted on a federal website. I'm expecting a bill that has passed the Senate committee to also make it through, and then that will probably become law. So that's something that everyone should keep an eye out, particularly in our state. If you're in a state where you have been able to bring in revenue in the contract pharmacy, in the managed care, Medicaid managed care area. There's also a bill that Larry Bouchon has introduced and was able to get through the Energy and Commerce Committee on a party line vote. There was only one Democrat who supported the bill, and that would require a host of new reporting information from hospitals in the program. And the HHS secretary would also have the opportunity to also impose those requirements on other entities that participate in the program, including the grantees. Next slide. Okay, the Senate 340B working group is probably the one that is getting the most attention. This is often called the Gang of Six or the Group of Six. It's led by Senator John Thune, a longtime supporter of the 340B program. Senator Thune, as you may have heard, is running to be the next majority or minority leader, depending on whether the Republicans take over the Senate after the November elections. He is currently the second-ranking Republican in the entire U.S. Senate. And he and a number of other lawmakers, including Tammy Baldwin and others, are working on trying to come up with a compromise bill that addresses the concerns of the provider community, but also addresses some of the wishes of the pharmaceutical industry. They have come up with a draft discussion bill that has been viewed largely positively by the 340B provider community, but it would impose some, and it would restore access to the contract pharmacy program. but it would potentially put some limits on the scope of the program, and it could also they're intending to also require covered entities to make sure that their financial assistance programs for patients are extended to the contract pharmacy counter. So this would be something that doesn't always occur in the contract pharmacy setting, but would be a requirement under the new law. And comments are due on April 1st. So I would strongly recommend that you weigh in. I actually have a column that addresses the issue that I'm happy to share with you, or I'm sure the folks at Visante would be happy to include it. That will be posted today. That really digs down on the actual bill and areas that you may want to weigh in on. Next slide. The Senate's interesting because you have two key leaders that are overseeing the Senate Help Committee, which is the Committee of Jurisdiction over the 340B program. You have Senator Bernie Sanders, who's very liberal and is very, very vocal in his criticism of the pharmaceutical industry. And then you have Senator Bill Cassidy, who is very concerned about the 340B program and what he thinks are abuses of the program and concerns about the growth in the 340B program. Senator Chairman Sanders has not been interested in addressing any significant reforms to 340B. On the other hand, Senator Cassidy is really trying to step up his investigation into the program. Starting in November, we could have a new chairman. It looks like the Republicans may take over the U.S. Senate. They have a very favorable map. And if that's the case, Senator Cassidy could be the next chairman of the committee. And I think with that, I think I have another slide. Is that right? Yes, great. And then let me just tell you a little bit about 340B before my voice completely disappears. We started 340B Report in 2020. I used to be the CEO of 340B Health for a long time. And so before that, I was a journalist at U.S. News and World Report. So I'm combining my understanding of journalism and writing and reporting with my understanding of the 340B program. I've hired a great staff. All of them are veteran reporters that know a lot about the program. And it's really the best way to get the latest information on 340B. It's a great way to hear from all sides, viewpoints on the program. And we are the ones who are always breaking the news when it comes to developments with 340B. We've had a long time partnership with Visante, and we're very, very happy to offer 25% discount for those who are not currently subscribers to 340B Report. All you have to do is use the code Visante25. Just go to our subscription page at 340breport.com. And if you're not ready to sign up, feel free to just get a free trial. And all of that information Visante will share with you afterwards. And I do want to say thank you to Visante, not only for their longtime sponsorship of 340B Report, but also for their great advice that they provide to our reporting team. Their guidance has been incredibly helpful to us as we report the news throughout the country. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted, and thank you, Kristin. Maybe just we got, I think, some time for a few questions. So if anybody has questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat. But a couple to start out with. Ted, I know that the preference is for the Patients Act to have that bipartisan, and currently there is no GOP co-sponsor for that legislation. Do you think that's going to be an impediment?
I do. So yeah, Representative Matsui introduced the bill yesterday. I know she had been working hard, and the providers in the program had been working hard to find a Republican co-sponsor. The House, as you know, Jim, is controlled narrowly by the GOP, so they set the agenda. So unless they can get more Republican support for the bill, it's not going to move. I know that 340B Health, I think, is having their lobby day next week. So that will be an opportunity for hospitals to encourage lawmakers from both parties to support this effort. As you know, Jim is a longtime veteran of the program. We've always had great bipartisan support for the program, and I think that's critically important for success. And I think that's why the Senate bill, the Sustained 340B Act, has so much momentum and opportunity for progress.
Another question: with so many states introducing legislation, do you think the drug manufacturers will fight those individually or try and bundle?
I think it's a combined effort. They are certainly working on some national strategies, particularly the SCARE campaign related to tying the 340B program to the immigration crisis. That is certainly something that they're doing at a national level. But they're working hard also in state-by-state activities. They have very good connections with the lawmakers in each state legislature. And they're, testifying at hearings. They're speaking one-on-one. All the things that you would expect from a very successful, powerful advocacy group. On the other hand, you've got hospitals, health centers, and independent pharmacists working together to try to get these bills enacted. I've been really impressed by the margin of victory for the bill so far in the state legislatures, and including in very, very conservative states like Kentucky and West Virginia. These bills are getting passed almost unanimously. But now we have these new advertising efforts to try to scare the governors of these states to try to get them to not sign the bills, which is problematic, and one where the providers will need to really, really re-step up their efforts to work with their governor to convince them that the 340B program has nothing to do with the immigration issue. And as you know, every provider who takes care of patients, they don't care whether you're an immigrant or whether you're not an immigrant. They just want to take good care of you and make sure that you stay healthy. And that's the goal. And that's the purpose of being a healthcare provider.
Kristin, one for you. With so many 340B programs already stretched razor thin in terms of resources, how onerous or how difficult do you see some of these new state-based transparency or reporting requirements being?
Very challenging. And the concern that I think most of our covered entities are bringing to us is similar to Caldero's initial audits that kind of rocked the world of a lot of the 340B covered entities that were receiving these very time-consuming, overwhelming requests for data that went back years and shared data that they hadn't previously had to provide in the past. I think the concern is, how much data are they going to need? How far back is that data going to need to go? We're seeing that for many states, it's a year. And where is there overlap with the work that's already being done through ESP and manufacturers that is being used to do real-time audits? And then also, as it relates to ESP inquiries, ultimately to result in taking money back from covered entities. So I think there's a lot of concern about the duplication or overlap, and then also the implications for what that means for covered entities that feel like everywhere they turn, there's an audit and there's the possibility of having money given back, which is a reality right now.
Thank you. And speaking of money, Ted, it would appear that the Biden administration, the budget preparation for HHS and OPA, it looks like that will remain flat. Do you think that's where we'll actually end up, or is there any light at the tunnel in terms of additional financial resources?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was actually surprised that the administration did not call for an increase in funding for the Office of Pharmacy Affairs. They did call for an increase in funding for the the mothership, which is HRSA, which is the agency that is above the Office of Pharmacy Affairs. But I think the idea may be that with the Senate bipartisan bill proposing the implementation of a user fee, that would help fund the Office of Pharmacy Affairs. I think they were thinking, well, let's try to get that legislation enacted. It's something that has been supported by both Republican and Democratic administrations for many years, and it's something that the Office of Pharmacy Affairs has advocated for. So perhaps that's the reason why they did not get a boost in the president's proposal.
And maybe one last question, with the proliferation of advocacy groups in the 340B space, and the obvious splintering of that initial coalition, how do you see that playing out over the long run?
Yeah, that's been one of the more disconcerting developments in the last year or so. As you know, Jim, there's a new group that's formed between pharma and the National Association of Community Health Centers, and that is split the traditional coalition, which consisted of all the different national organizations representing the providers in the program. And I think that it's hamstrung the efforts to get legislation enacted. My understanding is that pharma and NAC are working on their own bill. Then we've got the Congresswoman Matsui bill, which is the most provider-friendly of the bills that was just introduced. And then you have the group of 6 in the Senate that are working on their bill. So traditionally, we would go in with the community health centers when I was at 340B Health, often when it came to lobbying efforts. So this is a new world. I think that the health centers felt frustrated by what they perceived as inertia by the hospital associations when it came to trying to get a legislative fix to the contract pharmacy impasse. And so I think that my understanding from talking to the folks at NAC was they felt they couldn't wait any longer and needed to get legislation enacted. Now we do have bills that are being introduced that are pretty friendly to the hospitals. I think that should have been done earlier, but that has been a problem that hopefully at some point there will be some sort of resolution and some sort of détente, because this is it's not great when you have different groups with different agendas.
With the 2 pieces of federal legislation that you mentioned, if those do become law, would those supersede some of the state legislative initiatives that have been so successful?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. And you're talking about the 2 bills that would restore access to contract pharmacies at the one in the Senate and the one that Matsui just introduced. I don't exactly know what the preemption rules would be. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. I think that it would certainly, the Matsui bill would be a slam dunk victory for the providers in the program, and they probably all would feel like that's pretty darn good. But on the other hand, the Senate Group of 6 bill may be a little harder to implement and would be not as generous. So I think that there's going to be a desire among a number of entities to continue to have those state laws in place, which may be even more effective in some ways because of the great connections that the providers in the program have at a local level with their state legislatures.
Excellent. I want to thank you and Kristin again for all this great information. And Kirsten, I will turn it over to you for a wrap up.
Wow, that was so timely, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for everyone for attending our presentation today. I hope that you gained some new insights, and for sure you got some new information, which was awesome. Thanks again to Ted and Kristin and Jim for the presentation. So housekeeping wise, you can look for a follow-up email. We'll have a link to the recording. I'll also include the article that Ted mentioned so that you have access to that. Thank you, Ted. And some information too, if you're interested in being a first-time subscriber to the 340B report. And then some opportunity to follow up with us too if you have any additional questions or would like some more information. You also receive a very short survey. We love getting your feedback. Would appreciate any comments that you can provide to us to help us to continue to provide these presentations. And I think that's it for us today. So again, thank you for attending and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.